The result was a great victory for great people who wanted to create a country of justice, where rules and common sense prevail. I will be a president for all South Koreans.
All right, then let's dig deeper, of course, into the policy implications of that victory. Jack Barton joins us now live from Seoul. Jack, to what extent does Moon Jae-in's win complete Donald Trump's more aggressive stance in dealing with the DPRK?
Well, it definitely makes it more complicated. This comes, at exactly the same time that the US is saying the era of strategic patience with the DPRK is over and that all options are now on the table. And that clearly means the possibility of a preemptive strike if Washington believes Pyongyang goes too far with its nuclear missile program. Exactly at this moment, in steps Moon Jae-in, who wants to reopen the sunshine policy of the 1990s, talking about reopening the joint economic zones on the border, about giving financial incentives to Pyongyang, all in the hope of sort of diplomatically coaxing it into ending its nuclear missile program. The two may seem very opposed, but of course there's a lot of electioneering going on here. It's often been overlooked that Moon Jae-in has on many occasions talked quite tough, saying that if the DPRK does continue pushing ahead with missile tests, and particularly if there's a sixth nuclear test, then he could indeed respond by also pushing through for greater sanctions at the United Nations. So we don't know how much is really, on the campaign trail and how much of this is going to be really big reforms or big changes. Probably the test is going to be if and when there is some kind of provocation from the DPRK, and then how Moon responds to that is really going to give South Koreans as well as the international community really a better sense of where his administration will be going with regards to the regional security policy.
Indeed, Jack. Looking at the exit polls data, what was it that turned most voters away from the Conservative candidate in this election?
Well, many Conservatives still turned out and voted. If we look at the number of Conservative votes compared to Moon Jae-in's votes, perhaps the Conservatives won. The problem is they just had too many candidates, and that is all because of the corruption scandal that saw the former president, Park Geun-hye, land in the detention center where she is now on trial, and really the fragmentation of her party and a lot of conservative candidates going off in different directions. Some of them moderate conservatives, some of them radical conservatives. One of the presidential candidates was talking about bringing nuclear weapons back to South Korea. And then you had Ahn Cheol-soo, who was a progressive like Moon Jae-in, but he also took away a lot of conservative votes because of his more pro-business policies or business-friendly policies, and also the fact that he was a little tiny bit more hardline on the DPRK, but even he was talking about the need for dialogue and reviving the six-party talks. So on the one hand, you had a younger generation here, in particular, very much politically energized by the big street demonstrations, determined to come out and vote. And what is largely the older, much more conservative generation here, they just had too many candidates, so their votes got dissipated, and that played very well for Moon Jae-in.
Indeed. The president-elect also, of course, saying he favors reforming the country's enormous conglomerate, Samsung Group, for example. But what changes does he plan to implement specifically, and over what time frame?
There's a whole lot of changes he'd like to bring in to make the big conglomerates here like Samsung, Lotte, SK, Hyundai, to make them more transparent, more accountable. He's talking about electronic voting for minority shareholders. At the moment, they've got to turn up in person. He believes they should be able to vote electronically so that everybody gets a share in that process. He's talking about making CEOs of affiliates legally liable for losses to shareholders. He's talking about banning companies from using treasuries when dealing with mergers. That came up in one of the big corruption cases here that has now landed the heir apparent of Samsung, Lee Jae-yong, also in the same detention center as Park Geun-hye, the former president, also on trial. all related in on the same cases here. The problem is that when he becomes president, it's not official yet. The Election Commission has to, declare it so in about 5 hours' time from now. But we are expecting that to happen. When it becomes official, he's still going to have to face the national parliament here. And his party does not have a majority. And even Park Geun-hye tried to push through some of these reforms, and the parliament was very hostile. So no doubt small reforms like electronic voting for minority shareholders, that is likely to pass. But some of these bigger reforms, no one is really expecting that to pass until there are parliamentary elections in 2020. And even then, he's not guaranteed of getting a majority. He may still face a hostile parliament after that.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you for the update. That's Jack Barton live in Seoul.